Boa noite, Pascal.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited, and this is a true honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. Here's the most important thing I can tell you about the future, and that truly is that tomorrow will look dramatically different than today. So that's really everything you need to know about the future from my perspective. Until relatively recently, I told this story many, many times. I always said, like, at Singularity University, I said, like, tomorrow will look dramatically different than today. And people in the front row always they sat there and nodded friendly, but really they didn't believe it. And of course, we're now living in a world where this is very true. Here's what's happening in this interesting world. So we used to live in a world where we had 3 time horizons, the now, the next, and the beyond. The now is the stuff you do right now. The next is the stuff which is out there probably like 1 or 2 years from now. And then you've got the beyond. And the beyond is this interesting world of the future. And what COVID has done to us, and make no mistake, COVID is a terrible, terrible thing which happened to us on a personal level, on a societal level, on an economic level. But as a futurist, you get really excited about it, because what it has done is it has taken the time horizons and has compressed them into a single point in time. What used to be the now and the next 2 different time horizons is now truly a singular point in time. The now and next happens right here, right now. And I think you all can feel this. So that being said, let me start you off with a quote. This is a quote from the author Ayn Rand. And I would have never thought I'm going to quote her. But Ayn Rand once said something very, very profound. She said, you can avoid reality, but you cannot avoid the consequences of avoiding reality. So with that being said, let's dig into the content. Everything you need to know, I can summarize in a single slide, and my friends from Singularity University will know this really, really well. And it looks like this. This is the exponential curve. And the exponential curve, of course, describes how technology evolves. And a good example for this is the power of compute, where computers are getting twice as fast every 2 years, a true exponential growth. What the exponential curve shows us is this. If you're standing somewhere where this gentleman stands here, and you look to the past always feels flat and linear. It feels like nothing really has happened. When you have the ability to see the future is this weird, crazy land. Now, here's the important thing. There's a quote from Ernest Hemingway, which we like to use, and we now call this the Hemingway law of motion. And the quote is, as you can see, gradually and then suddenly. Keep this in mind. These technologies and much of this stuff, they have a tendency to develop gradually, and then suddenly they explode. They feel like they come out of nowhere, and they creep up on us, and then suddenly they turn into this crazy, crazy new thing. With that being said, I want to talk you and walk you through a little bit of our way of how we're thinking about disruption. Disruption is an interesting word, which I find massively overused today. We use this everywhere. You can't read a news article which doesn't use this word, and yet it doesn't mean anything anymore. So we want to disrupt this for you a little bit in the next 20 minutes. Here's how this works. This is the definition of the word disruption from a dictionary from 1913. And disruption is the state of being rent asunder or broken in pieces. It means you become irrelevant, or you're becoming broken. And that's a very good description of what disruption looks like. Now, when you think about disruption, you typically hear these following stories, and I'm pretty sure you heard of them. When we talk about disruption, we talk about companies like Kodak or Blockbuster or Nokia. And if you're anything like me, and you look at disruption, and you hear these stories, you just want to throw up in your mouth a little bit. You just want to vomit. We have heard these stories all the time, over and over and over again, and the stories are always the same. The story is always Kodak got disrupted by the digital camera and ultimately Instagram, of course. Blockbuster got disrupted by Netflix and the streaming videos. Nokia got disrupted by the smartphone or the iPhone. I think there's an interesting flaw in this story, and this is what I want to teach you. I think the story is that we look at the world of disruption and we look at it through the lens of these companies. And we say these companies, the new companies, they're the enemy. Clayton Christensen wrote a book where he described a theory which he calls the jobs to be done theory. This means the jobs we hire a product for us to do. A good example for this is photos. You're still taking photos today. They just don't happen to be on film anymore. They're now digital. or movies. We're still actually watching movies. They just happen to be not on a videotape anymore or a DVD. They come streamed into our televisions. And even on the phone side, you still use a phone to communicate. What is it which makes companies trip over their own 2 feet? And I want to share with you now the 3 main forces. And I will share those forces with you for 2 reasons. The one is, again, if you're in an established company, you can protect yourself from those forces if you can actually even identify them. So you need to be able to see and name them, and then you can protect yourself. So here it goes. And I want to talk to you about these forces by talking about Nokia. We met a lot of people at Nokia who were at Nokia when Nokia got disrupted by the iPhone. And here's how this all works. Nokia brought out this phone, the second from the left. And then what Nokia does is, and if you're my age, you will remember this very well, what Nokia did is they started innovating. So they made the phone a little bit better. It became a little smaller, it became a little bit more capable. And at the height, at the end of this line, in March 2007, Nokia introduced the Nokia N95. This was the flagship phone from Nokia. I did buy one of those. They were $400. It was an amazing phone. It was made out of aluminum. It had a very powerful battery. It lasted 2 weeks. In June of the same year, Apple introduces this. Everybody who talks about the iPhone and how Nokia got disrupted by the iPhone talks about the iPhone, as if the iPhone is a single thing. But the iPhone isn't a single thing. The iPhone is the combination of all of these things. The iPhone is a different screen. It's a different battery. It's a different form factor. It's a different processor. It's a different operating system. And the list goes on and on. And then I have the great pleasure of meeting the person who's responsible for the screens at Nokia. And I asked him, didn't you see these new screens coming, these touch screens? And he says to me, Pascal, of course I knew that, because I had the exact same prototype as Apple on my desk. And then I meet the person who's responsible for the CPU, the chip, the main chip. And I asked him, didn't you see these powerful chips? And he says to me, Pascal, of course. But what Nokia couldn't do is they couldn't put it together. Because, and this is the first force, disruption is not a singular feature. Disruption is the smart combination of many of those things, packaging them into a new form factor. You will never get disrupted just by AI or by robotics or by any other technology. You will get disrupted by someone combining these things in new and interesting ways. That's your first force. The second one is this. There's a video on the internet which shows you Steve Ballmer. Steve is was the CEO of Microsoft. And if you remember, Microsoft had a mobile phone operating system when the iPhone came out. And they asked Steve an interesting question, and I invite you to go on YouTube, find this video, it's very funny. And they asked Steve, about a week after the iPhone comes out in 2007, they say, Steve, what do you think about the iPhone? And Steve starts laughing and he says, $500, fully subsidized with a plan, that is the most expensive phone in the world. And it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine. And when you watch the video, you will probably also laugh. But then I watched this video 10 times because I'm asking myself, what is it he is missing that I am seeing, that I know to be true today with hindsight? What is it he makes, where is he getting wrong? And then it dawns on me, because he makes the same mistake we all would make. He compares the iPhone to the frame of reference he has. And the frame of reference he has at the time is 2 things: a phone, like a Nokia phone, and a BlackBerry. And the BlackBerry is an email machine. But the iPhone is neither. The iPhone is a mini computer in your pocket. And this is the most important thing you can learn about disruption, because Nokia never built a computer. Nokia's existing skills and processes became irrelevant. You would have never beaten Nokia by creating another phone, but by creating something which Nokia has never built before, you suddenly can create something which disrupts Nokia. Your existing skills and processes are no longer relevant. Let me show you how this looks like in the real world. I was born in Germany. We love our cars in Germany, as you might know. This here is the combustion engine of a car, the car which drives with normal gas. That engine has more than 2,500 moving parts. Now you compare this with the electric motor. The electric motor, and this is a diagram of the Tesla motor, has about 40 moving parts. You can make this anywhere in the world. You don't need specialized labor. And suddenly you find yourself, if you are, for example, Volkswagen or BMW or Mercedes, with tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people whose existing skills and processes became irrelevant. Last factor. If you've ever seen Apple introduce, particularly when Steve Jobs was still around, introduce a new product, it is a little bit like the Oscars. It's this big unveil. Now, if you compare this with how we bought a phone prior to the iPhone, you walk into this store and there's a person who sells you a phone with a contract, and they just hate you. They just want to get you out of the store as quickly as possible so they can make their money, and then they put you on a 2-year contract, which you paid too much money for. That was your experience. Now you compare this with how Apple sells you a phone. They have you go into this temple which is made out of steel, glass, and wood. You don't go there to buy anything, you go there to worship. And you don't buy anything from someone, you go to the geniuses, and they're really friendly, nice people helping you instead of selling you. Disruption almost always reaches a tipping point at the go-to market. You don't get disrupted by something which happens because it's better. You don't get disrupted by something which happens because it is made in a lab. You get disrupted because someone brings it to the market in an interesting and good new way. So 3 main forces you have. Disruption is not a singular feature. Your existing skills and processes become irrelevant. And disruption almost always reaches a tipping point at the go-to market. Think about this, because this is how disruption happens. And if you're in an established company, this is how you protect yourself. Because when you understand it, you can actually do something about it. Now, I want to leave you with 2 of my favorite quotes. First of all, this is Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit. Intuit is a very successful software company in Silicon Valley. And he said that success is a powerful thing because it tends to make companies stupid and they become less and less innovative. And I think that's universally true. So be careful that if you're getting too successful, it might get in your way because we become a little cocky. We become a little too sure of ourselves. And here's the second quote. This gentleman is Ron Shaich. Ron is a dear friend of mine. He's the founder of Panera Bread, which is a healthy fast food chain in the United States. Very successful. And I sat down with Ron to have dinner. And I asked him, Ron, how did you do this? And Ron gave me a very beautiful quote. He said, our approach has always been to discover today what will matter tomorrow, and then to transform our company into a future that is unfolding before us. And I think that's exactly what we have to do as leaders. We need to figure out what tomorrow looks like. And of course, our dear friends from HSM, Singularity Brazil, are here to do exactly this. Understanding what the future looks like, and then creating a story, a narrative around this future. And then once you have that, once you can see the future, then you can transform your company into that future, which is now unfolding in front of your eyes. My friends, this is what I had for you. I'm super curious about the conversation we're now having. If you want to be in touch, send a simple email to this email address. You will get back an email automatically with my personal contact details, my LinkedIn, as well as we share all our research very openly and we'll add you to our mailing list. So with that being said, thank you again for having me. It is an honor and a pleasure.